I wanted, before I go through some slides, I wanted to dispel a few things about fraud. One is that fraud only happens to people like Enron and WorldCom and a few bad apples that operate in these companies that get caught doing things wrong. But the reality is that fraud is pervasive. It's happening here at Rutgers. It's happening at every company. It's estimated by the ACFE, Associated Certified Fraud Examiners, of which I'm one of them, that it's 5% of revenue in the average organization. So that's 5% of budget in a nonprofit. It's 5% of revenue in a $100 billion company. It's $5 billion a year. The other myth is that somehow there's some type of really mean, seedy people that commit fraud, when in reality fraud is not committed by scumbags. It's committed by people that you probably live next to and respect very much, and maybe it's committed by you as well. And the reason is that people have all kinds of motives to commit fraud. There are, and they're not necessarily bad motives in one sense. So, for example, if I am a controller in an organization and I work and live with you guys every day, I spend more time with you than I do with my wife and my kids because we're trying to get a job and we're working hard. Not that that's good, but that may be what I'm doing. And I'm going to use provisions to adjust earnings for this month, because if I don't, when we report to the street where we're at, our stock is going to plummet and maybe we're going to lose everything, go out of business, lose to our competitors. And all I got to do is do some creative earnings management with some of the provisions, and I can stabilize this, and it'll come back next year or next month, next quarter, and it'll be okay. So what I'm doing is I'm helping you, my friends, that I work with every day, to save your jobs and your livelihood. So, what's wrong with that? Maybe I work for company X and I'm making $100,000 a year. Stephanie works for company B and she's making $200,000 a year, and I put in more hours and I'm doing a better job than Stephanie is. So me taking some money or adjusting something in the performance to get my bonus is not too bad. Unless it's not a bad. You're making $200,000. It's not a bad thing. So why? What's the problem? And maybe this is a challenge to you. If I told you that if you could steal $1,000 from Rutgers here, and you knew you wouldn't get caught, you were absolutely confident, and that's what's called opportunity that people see with fraud. How many in here would do it? Steal $1,000 from Rutgers? We got James to do it. Okay. All right. How about it was $100,000? You knew you wouldn't get caught. How about $2 million, and you knew you wouldn't have to? Oh, there we go. And you had $2 million, and you really knew you would not get caught, and you wouldn't have to work again, because if you invest $2 million at 5% interest, you're making $100,000 a year for the rest of your life without touching your principal. So, but I'll tell you, what's happening really with fraud is that we're not finding most of it, we're finding a very small percentage of fraud. And I'm going to show that to you here. So just think about this, and I had an experience in one company where there was a person that stole $350,000 from the company, and over a 3-year period, and they did not get caught until they actually went on vacation one time. But what happened, this person was in the doing fraud research for the legal department, was an 18-year employee with the company, had a stellar record, no criminal background at all. And all the person was doing was, you get a travel card when you travel with a company, and and this person had a travel card, but they never traveled very much. And they were the liaison between the bank, the World Bank or whoever, the bank and the company for these travel cards. And what happens when companies have these arrangements, they have the travel card and they get kickbacks. These are legitimate kickbacks. If you do a certain amount of volume with airlines, we're going to give you money back. And there were things like mistakes and returns. And whenever there were, the bank would call up this individual who was just a representative, had a card but wasn't traveling. And the bank said, yeah, we have this kickback or this credit. Where would you like us to credit it? And the individual just said, oh, just credit it to this account number because that, you know, and it was there, the person's account number as opposed to some kind of return account number. And then the person went into an ATM and just took money out against their card, which there's no control on that because we don't care if money comes in, we care when money goes out. Had they traveled, someone would have had to, with 4 eyes principle, which probably isn't adequate either, someone would have had to approve the travel. But to get money back in your account, there was no approval of the travel. And the way the person got caught was they were asked to have someone, to train someone to do what they were doing, and they got very upset about that, and they treated the individual they were training very badly because they knew that this person potentially could mess up the little scheme that they had going. They had it going with a couple other people. And so finally, they trained the person in a very caustic way, and the person eventually that did go on vacation, and when the temporary person took over, they were so upset that they decided to dig into some of the detail of what this person was doing, and they found the fraud, $350,000. I'd like to tell you, we found it as internal auditors. We got called in afterwards to investigate it, you know, what happened and everything. That was great, so it already happened, and it went on for 3 years before they were caught. But this would not be the kind of person that you would say, oh, you know, this person is liable to commit fraud. In fact, it's probably mostly, it is the data shows it's mostly accountants and C-level executives that commit fraud. And why is that? Because they know the internal control process, they know when the auditor's coming, they know what they're looking at, and they know how long they're going to be there. So I'm going to take you through some data here, and this is empirical data on fraud. But first I want to try something. I'm not sure it's going to work, but I want to play a little video for you about, let's see if I can get this to work. This is about a fraud investigation, okay, and how to properly do a fraud investigation. Let's see if this is going to work here. I just want to see if I can get this.
Tape is rolling. Interview begins 14:20. Right, Mr. Murphy. Perhaps you could start by telling us about your connection to Reflections nightclub.
Didn't have any connection to it.
Funny. Because according to this form, you were one of the directors. For the benefit of the tape, I am now showing the suspect Exhibit A19, an application for a mortgage on the aforementioned property.
I've never seen that before in my life.
This is kind of a comedy.
Really? Oh, maybe they made a mistake. Hey. Perhaps instead you can tell me about the receipts that were found in your jacket pocket earlier today. For the benefit of the tape, I am now showing the suspect Exhibits A20 through 27, receipts for expenses totaling £2,496. Well?
What? That's a plant.
Mr. Murphy, alleging these receipts were planted in your jacket pocket by this individual. Alright, let's move on. Tell me, do you recognise this man?
Yeah.
For the benefit of the tape, the suspect has identified Martin Wright of 44 West Road, currently in custody. Oh, wait, tell me you don't know this man now?
What? I know of him, I've seen him, but that's all right.
Perfect, Mr. Murphy, let's move on. Right, so when you met Martin Wright, what did you two talk about?
Look, I've never met Martin Wright. I've even heard me, Uncle. Did you just pause that?
Are you refusing to answer, Mr. Murphy?
No, this is witnesses can prove what I was that night.
Suspect refuses to answer. Oh dear, oh dear. Not going very well, is it? Mr. Murphy, sit down. Now I can tell you're a very busy man. I'll cut straight to the chase, yeah? Now I've got one very, very simple question for you, Mr. Murphy. Did you burn down the Knights Club? Yes. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. That's all we need.
This is a setup.
Interview's over. So Mr. Murphy back to his cell, would you, Carter?
Go. There's no tape in here.
Right.
No, look, sorry, I've had enough.
Mr. Murphy, calm down.
I'm not going to calm down.
Give us the gun back, Murphy. Suspect is armed and becoming desperate.
Give me my gun back.
Mr. Murphy, don't do it.
Yeah, all right.
Hard one.
Now that's how not to do an investment business. This is a little bit. I am going to show you some actual fraud cases. I have another video I want to show you about how people can test the fraud and how to do it. So, some data here, and this is 5 of the 7 largest bankruptcies in history filed annual reports with clean audit opinions. Enron was awarded an award for how good their compliance program was a year before they went under. So all the press you hear about great companies doesn't necessarily pan out. We've seen problems. We've seen frauds that happen with all of these companies. We've got everything from Bernie Madoff. The problems keep coming. In 2002, we implemented Sarbanes-Oxley with the idea that we're going to start to address these kinds of Enron, WorldCom kinds of events. That was the impetus for the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that you're all going to be auditing for and checking for. But it hasn't helped. These things are still happening every day. Whether they're cyber-type hacks, they've changed in sophistication, but we're constantly seeing them still happening. Okay. Lehman Brothers, Texaco, GM, and recently there's been lots of others. And then there's people who stand up and do something about it. The people, and a lot of times they're employees that have everything to lose, including family and everything. And 3/4 of people who whistleblow, just to encourage you in this, lose their jobs. So you have a family and you have an income, and you're at a company and you see someone doing something wrong, and you speak up. Now you don't have a job, and you can't feed your family. And this happens all the time. And a lot of what happens is things get settled. Is it going forward on me? These people end up in jail. They end up without jobs. They end up getting retaliated against. And there's laws now that help address the retaliation. But a lot of times companies have more money than you do, and they can wait longer than you do, and they can hire better lawyers than you can. And so, even though you might be right, you may still lose. So, and that's a fact. This is, can anyone tell me what this says? In Chinese, I think? Help me out.
Chinese.
Very good. I think this thing is running automatically somehow. Very good. Dangerous opportunity. Definition of fraud. There's 7 parts of a fraud. A fraud is not a mistake. There's a difference between a mistake and a fraud. A representation about a material claim which is false, and intentionally or recklessly there has to be some intent, and there has to be some harm which is believed and acted upon by the victim to the victim's damage. So in order for there to be a fraud, there has to be a wrong intent. It can't just be a mistake. It's not a fraud. And there has to be some type of damage. Someone has to be hurt by it in some way for it to be a fraud versus a mistake. The ACFE estimates that fraud is 5% of revenue in the average company. Some of the research that was actually done here at Rutgers on auditing and fraud estimates that another 5% of fraud is a result of mistakes. So, and that's where what we're studying here with analytics, we're going to address both of them. We're going to address fraud and prevent fraud by creating this perception of monitoring, but we're also going to address errors. And one of the things we find when we start to run analytics on databases is we find that the data is bad. There's a lot of mistakes in data, and we're not finding it because we're out doing these traditional sort of sample approaches to find problems or analyze data. Okay. So what's the difference between auditing and fraud? Now, what's interesting in auditing is that for many years, auditing has not addressed fraud. The SAS 99 and the big companies, they have some things in there for fraud, but basically they say, fraud is not, it's not our job to find fraud, whether I'm an external auditor, an internal auditor, or even management, because, and the truth is, the reason for that is fraudsters are way smarter than, they know, and we'll talk about why, they know how to commit a fraud, and even if you close one loop, they're going to find another way to do it. And, that we really don't have a good way, and certainly not our sample-based periodic review, is not finding fraud. Because, again, most of the fraud is committed by accountants and C-level executives, and they already know what you're doing, so they're going to work around it. But just the difference is, an external, internal audit is recurring. A fraud examination is an event triggered by someone doing something wrong. The scope is on an audit plan that we give you for accounts payable, where an investigation is on some type of circumstances. We determine intent with a fraud. We issue an opinion with an audit. Methodology is audit techniques, fraud examinations are forensic techniques. And that's what a lot of the students in this, and I encourage you guys to get involved in fraud investigations, although that's kind of a after the fact, that's going in after the fact. The real power of what we're talking about here is how do we prevent fraud? How do we detect and prevent fraud? Because if you can prevent fraud, that's a huge advantage over investigating. Because we'll never have enough investigators to investigate all the fraud if we don't find ways to prevent it. And I'll submit to you that we're not really doing a great job of preventing fraud today, because we're using antiquated tools and we're not really dealing with the opportunity, which is the part that we can affect. There's three parts of fraud, and we'll talk about that later, but opportunity, motivation, and rationalization. The two, motivation and rationalization, are sort of personal things, but opportunity is something that I either have or don't have in the company. And that's why I asked you, when I asked you about, if you would steal $1,000 from Rutgers, you would, and you knew you wouldn't get caught. That's the opportunity part. I really believe that people aren't stupid. They don't commit fraud if they know they're going to get caught. And that's what analytics do. They create this perception of monitoring, population analytics, so people don't believe, they're an idiot if they think they're not going to get caught, because I'm monitoring everything you do, every transaction on a continuous basis, as opposed to taking some kind of sample. And again, in auditing, it's sample-based traditionally, and as required could be a full review. Doing investigations is really interesting. I've done a few of them. I'm a certified fraud examiner, but I really wish I could have done more work with investigations. I was so busy with risk management and auditing, and it seems I didn't do many investigations, but I had some good friends, and the guy that I usually have come in for this class does investigations all over the world. And, but it's dangerous too. You go down to Colombia or some of these Venezuela, and you do an audit, and you got to do things like go in and make a hotel reservation at one hotel, but then don't show up for that and go to another hotel, because people get mad when you're investigating them, especially if they're part of some drug cartel or something like that. And in external or internal audit, we're using professional skepticism. In a fraud examination, we're using proof. We need discovery type proof, and that's one of the things you have to do. And I encourage you, if you're ever involved, as many of you will be in a fraud, hopefully it's not one you committed, but document everything. Write down, and I was involved in things, internal things related to fraud, and we constantly documented everything. Drew said to me that this happened on this day, and even if it's just a Word file with everything documented out. Because someday you're going to have to do a deposition, and you're going to be called into a courtroom, and you're going to have to testify, and you better be sure you have your facts right. You can't say, well, Drew told me that, I don't know whether it was April or May or something. That's a big, so write things down. And I encourage you too, if you're ever a whistleblower, and I encourage you guys to do that. That's good, you're standing up, I like that. I want you to feel free to do that. She's burning 5 times the calories than the rest of us here, so feel free to do that. But if you get called in, you want to make sure you have clear documentation of what you're saying in an investigation. I've been involved in 6 hours of sitting with attorneys in New York on testifying on an investigation. So it's not fun, and it costs a huge amount of money, waste of money. Where we can prevent the fraud through analytics, we can accomplish a lot of fraud. Okay, 2 general classifications of fraud: committed against an organization or committed on behalf of an organization. That's where I'm either robbing money or I'm doing earnings management to help my company, or think I help my company. both are insidious, both are wrong. I want to encourage you that if you guys will, one question I ask people when I interview them is, tell me about a time where you were asked to do something wrong, and how did you react to that? And I'm interested in seeing that people were willing to did have integrity, and they were willing to stand alone, even if it did cost them their job. And I encourage you to, if you get asked to do something wrong, and you will in your career at some point, I guarantee it, do the right thing, because you have to look at that person in the mirror, and your children and grandchildren, your spouse are, interested in what kind of person you are, not how much money you make, and it'll eventually catch up with you. So, but if you do get in that situation, document everything. Make sure if you're going to whistleblow, document everything you've done. And I think it's going to get better over the years. So I'm going to show you the corruption index, at least in the United States. And the United States isn't the best. There's a lot of countries in Denmark and Sweden and other places that have better integrity way better integrity than the United States. And there's a lot of other countries that, you probably, in some countries, for example, in Nigeria, you can't get out of the airport personally without bribing somebody. So corruption is sort of in the culture in many countries. Okay. So these are the classes of fraud: asset misappropriations, corruption, and financial fraud. The most popular one, what do you think is the most popular one here? What happens the most of those frauds, do you think? Anybody? Which one do you think happens the most?
Corruption?
Corruption, yeah. No, actually not. Asset misappropriation. That's right. 30% chance, 33% chance of getting it. Actually, asset misappropriations happens the most, because that's everything from, forging checks to stealing paper clips to throwing copper over the fence at a plant. Anything that's an asset, anything I steal from the company, anything that's an asset. Whereas corruption is, I have to be paying a bribe to someone. But corruption would be second. But the one that has which one do you think has the biggest financial impact? On, which ones cost the most when they do happen? They may not happen as frequently. Sure, again.
The financial statement?
Yeah, that's the ones, that's the earnings management, that's the Enron, that's the WorldCom. So they have the biggest dollar value. We'll look at some of those statistics. So, and then you're liable for both criminal law and civil law. Sometimes it's a settlement, so it could be a criminal case or it can be a civil case. And the preponderance of evidence is for a civil case, and beyond a reasonable doubt is for a criminal case. So there's a stricter, but you always want to be prepared for a criminal case. That's why when you find something wrong, you want to document, and always document with smart, specific facts. Don't say, Taylor wasn't very nice, and I think she did it. Yes, James.
Could you just record stuff with a tape recorder?
Well, that's a good question. That's a tricky one, because it depends on the jurisdiction you're in. In some cases, you're allowed to record. In some cases, that wouldn't be admissible in court, because you could get in trouble for doing it.
So like a wiretap is just...
Yeah, well, in some jurisdictions, it's okay. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know exactly where, but I know in some cases you can record things. And you never, as someone in, whistleblowing, you never want to, come out and say that, Tony committed a fraud, because that's something that has to be decided in a court of law. But you can say, these are the facts that I saw when you're whistleblowing and documenting. So, but be careful about, becoming CISI or whatever, And the SEC now has a reward system for people who report securities fraud, where you can actually get up to, $3 million or $30 million. You get, I can't remember the exact number, but you can get up to a certain amount of the settlement. But there again, you're going up against the big boys, and they have lots of money, and they have great lawyers, and they'll, and I've seen it happen where people have whistleblowed, and they were absolutely right, but they couldn't wait for the EEOC or someone to take the case because they needed to go get a job. So the company can just wait them out, and they decide, because they don't have a job and they have to feed their family, they decide to settle. And the settlement's, out of court. And one of the sad things is very few frauds are prosecuted because it's much easier to settle than to, companies do not want, they'll settle sometimes very generously. But what happens then is the fraudster walks away and gets a job somewhere else and does the same thing again. And the company gets absolved because they just gave a lot of money out and nobody, and the problem doesn't get solved, and it happens again. Or the person, the fraudster goes and does it somewhere else. Because no company wants publicity. No one, if you found out that your MasterCard, that MasterCard was doing something wrong, and you don't want to hold a MasterCard, you don't want to buy a product from a company that has fraud going on. So that's a real sad testimony, but, and 87% of people that commit fraud are first-time offenders. They have no record. Because you'll go out and people say, well, we run background checks on everyone. Great, run all the background checks you want, because most people that commit fraud are first-time offenders with no criminal record at all. And the ones that do commit fraud go and do it up other places because there's nobody wants any publicity around it, so they're not prosecuting people. That's unfortunate. All right, why people commit fraud? Okay, who is in the best position to con you right now? Your parents. Remember, it's always those you trust the most who are in the best position to commit fraud. So it's people in trusted positions that commit fraud usually. Just like abuse is often family members and friends that happen because they're in a position of trust. So it's it's usually someone, whether it's a customer or an employee or a vendor or someone you trust that commits fraud. This is just the criminal versus civil cases. In the criminal case, I mentioned that it's a stricter requirement in a criminal case. You have to be beyond a reasonable doubt versus just a preponderance of evidence. You must have a 12-person jury in a criminal case. You have fewer than 12 people in a civil case. You need a unanimous verdict. You only need you could have less than a unanimous verdict in a civil case. That's kind of the O.J. Simpson thing, right? He went through the criminal case and was acquitted, and then in the civil case, he got, the level of evidence wasn't strong. Okay? So just, okay, so myths about fraud. All right? The first one is, we hire honest people. And I'll tell you, that was me for the first 20 years of my career. I said, there's no fraud going on in my department because I hire good, honest people. And so those people aren't the kind of people that commit fraud. It's those other people in those other companies that have the problem. They're older than 30 years old, more male than female. You women are much more honest than the men. Appearance of a stable family situation, although sometimes they have extravagant lifestyles. One of the things we do in auditing is we go out and we walk in the door of the facility, and you'll never automate this with an analytic, and we look to see if the accounts payable clerk is driving a Lamborghini, for example, which might be an indication that maybe this person is living beyond their means. Postgraduate education, so now that you're doing your MBA, you should be better at fraud. One thing to learn. Good psychological health, or at least less likely, I said they don't have criminal records, because they're in a position of trust, and they know accounting. And they know accounting processes, which are mostly accounting of some salespeople and C-level executives. They know how the control system works. The woefully inadequate control system that we're using today, because it's periodic, it's sample-based, we're doing non-statistically sample-based. It's all based on 4 eyes, so if I have a collusion, I can do whatever I want if I have something to collude. Another myth is that, oh, well, don't worry about it. The internal auditors or the external auditors are finding fraud in our company, so we're all set. 3% of the audits that are the frauds that are found, and we're not finding most of them, are found by external auditors. 14% are found by internal auditors. So, and the rest are found, of the ones we're finding, are found by mostly tips or whistleblowers. Even competitors sometimes find fraud. So we're not finding it. 3% of the ones that are found by the people that are supposedly, looking at fraud. And I love some of the PCAOB and some of the new stuff that's come out in auditing about, you know, finding fraud, and they do things like, you know, go and ask people if they're committing fraud. Are you committing fraud? No. We're all set. Or do better documentation. Take more samples. Take more non-statistical samples. This is what we're doing. We're putting surveys out to see who's committing fraud. I mean, you know, I'm sorry, but fraudsters are a little smarter than that. So, and why? Well, we're following the audit program that we've been doing for 20 years. So just go do this same audit program, and the people you're auditing know what you're doing and everything. So it's predictable. It's not my job to find fraud, and that's what we say as auditors. You know, the fraud is for somebody else. Not sure who they are, but someone else should be finding fraud, not me. We're not trained to look for it. We don't have experience, and we're not leveraging technology on it. I'm convinced that that is the thing. I mean, I even see it personally. I think I shared the example earlier in the class where, you know, at Siemens we monitored everywhere someone went on the websites, on the computers. And and if you went, and it was all automated, and if you went to a site you shouldn't be at, you'd get caught immediately. Whether they acted on it or not, I don't know, but there's a perception of monitoring. So I'm not going to a porn site, I'm not going to run a separate business in that area. But if I know that, you know, the expense reports, they're taking a sample of 10% of $2 billion worth of expense reports over a year, and they're doing a check on those, which is just, does the receipt match the, you know, the recording? And someone's going to take a chance. Say, you know, I got a less than 10% chance probably of getting caught, and so they don't pay me enough money, so I'm going to steal money there. Okay. Another one: fraud happens to other people. Okay, that doesn't happen in our company. And this is probably the biggest one because we all have what I had for 20 years. I hire good people. Nobody should ever be put in a position where they can perpetrate or conceal a fraud. I don't care if they are, you know, the best, you know, leader of their mosque or church, and they're the most wonderful people in the world. Don't put them in that position for this simple reason that Lord Acton said that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's why our movie stars fall, our athletes fall, and have all kinds of problems, because they're given a tremendous amount of power by us, and there's no control of it. So, you know, you make $10 million, and when you do a movie, and then you have nothing to do for 6 months with $10 million, so you go get in trouble and you lose your family, or you get on drugs, or you have some addiction, or whatever, you know. So power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. People need to know their areas of responsibility, their limited authority. So we're not doing anybody a favor in a company by saying, man, Jackie's such a great person, so let's just let her do whatever she wants in the company. You know, and I've been in meetings where people say things like, you know, well, yeah, our salespeople cheat on their expense reports, but man, they're selling product, you know, like crazy. You know, I mean, that's sort of the rationale we go. You know, Jackie's cheating on her. She's using the private corporate jet and the condo down there in the Bahamas, but she's selling like crazy, so that's okay if she commits a fraud. You know, even though you can't use the private jet, you know. So I mean, this is the kind of rationale we have, you know, and you know, but we ruin people by doing that. Another one: skepticism is embedded in an auditor's mind and training. So we're trained to be skeptical, you know, to trust but verify. Yeah, well, you know, if you don't know what it's like, you don't understand how a fraudster thinks, and that's what they think. They think, how can I beat this system? I challenge you, in any job you've ever had, whether it's a cashier in a store or working as an internship in an audit department, you know, stop and think for a minute. How could I steal money or steal something in this company and not get caught? Whether it's a small amount of money or a large amount. And in most cases, you're probably going to be able to think of a scenario that I could take, you know, a little bit out of petty cash, and no one's going to find it. And reasons we commit fraud. So this is what's called the fraud triangle. This was developed back in the 1950s, and it's still pretty standard approach. Some people argue that there's also a lot of sort of sophisticated psychology that goes around it. But it basically says that we have pressure or motivation, and that motivation, again, can be very benevolent. My grandmother is dying of cancer. She has no medical coverage, so I'm going to steal some money to help pay for her treatment, but I'm going to give the money back. We have rationale, which is what I shared earlier. You know, I live and work with you guys. You're my family. We're together in this, and I'm saving your jobs, or I'm helping my grandmother, or I'm not getting paid like Taylor's getting paid way more than me, and I'm doing a better job than her, and I deserve this money, so I'm just taking what's rightfully mine from the company. But opportunity is the one that we can impact with technology, and that's what we should do. We should dress up. I can't deal with people's rationale sometimes, or even their motive. We all have motives for doing things, but I can make it so it's not attractive. I will not believe that I won't get caught. If I believe I'm going to get caught, I'm an idiot to do fraud. If I'm going to go to a porn site when they're monitoring everywhere I go, I'm stupid because I'm going to get caught doing it. Okay? But if I know all they're doing is once a year they're taking a sample of 25 or 30 websites, I have a very slim chance of getting caught. And the fraud gets larger and larger as confidence in the fraud gets higher and higher. So, the more you get away from something. And that's the triangle. Not that this covers everything, but this is the thing. And where we want to focus on really is the opportunity piece. Okay? So pressure is financial pressure, vices like addictions and other things, work-related pressures, or any type of pressure. Anything that causes you to feel you've got to act in a way that's not correct. Opportunity, lack of controls. I put that no perception of monitoring. Get that point because that'll be on the exam, this idea of perception of monitoring. It's not that you monitor everything, but people believe you're monitoring everything, or a lot of things. Failure to discipline fraudsters, and that's the dilemma I shared with you where we're not disciplining fraudsters because it's bad publicity. I don't want to, in the paper that I prosecuted something. Lack of access to information. In other words, we don't really know what people are doing because we're not monitoring it. Ignorance, apathy, capacity, incapacity. How do you feel about ignorance and apathy? I don't know and I don't care. And a lack of an audit trail. There's no audit trail around fraud. Okay. So, you mentioned in the thing you just got about the presentation, you guys mentioned about collusion. And that's one of the things I shared at the beginning of the class. It's because of collusive fraud that our internal control system that is based on 4 Eyes principle is totally inadequate. Because if there's collusion, my whole, not just one control, but my whole control environment goes out the window. Because if you're working together and all my controls are based on 4 Eyes principle, you see something and you do something and you approve it. You write a PO and you pay the bill for it. There's a segregation of duties, but it's only too deep. And that's the collusion. And anytime there's collusion, I can override a fraud. And you'll see in the statistics that almost 50% of all fraud is collusive, and almost all financial fraud is collusive. So we're missing. Because as long as I get someone else to work with me, whether it's a secretary or another C-level executive or another accountant, we can commit fraud. And that's what happened at Enron and WorldCom and other places. People were cooperating together to commit fraud. And it's not hard, birds of a feather flock together. It's not hard to sit in the water cooler and find someone that's as disgruntled as you are with the way you're being paid or the way things are going at the company, and to find someone to work with. So that's a real important point. So I'm going to take you through now. I don't have it with me here. I have and I encourage you, I'm going to put this out on the board. It's called the ACFE 2016 Report to the Nations, and it's one of the few, everyone has an opinion about fraud, but it's one of the few empirical studies that's been done on fraud, and it's done every year, every other year. And it's based on several thousand actual fraud cases, so it's not someone saying, well, I think it's this. The only estimate in there is the 5% of revenue. And again, most people that deal with fraud, certified fraud examiners, feel that's low. So just look at some of these statistics. They're interesting. I think this one was 1,400 cases. there was a total loss of $6.3 billion, and that's just in the ones they found. If you extrapolate that over the GDP, the number is astronomical. 23% of the cases were more than $1 million in loss. The median loss per case was $150,000. That's everything from asset misappropriation to corruption to financial audit fraud. Okay, so just some of these are really interesting statistics. So you can see that the median loss. So I said the most common one is asset misappropriation, but the biggest, and you guessed that right there, the financial statement loss is the biggest number. These are the $1 million losses per incident, okay, whether it's earnings management or balance sheet, income statement, fraud, or whatever. Corruption is here, asset misappropriation, because that's stuff like stealing a laptop or stealing paper clips. Did anyone ever steal a paper clip from their office, bring one home from Rockford? Raise your hands. Okay. Get their names down. What was your rationale for that? It's an asset. All right, this is the one about asset misappropriation. So that's things like, check tampering, which is less common today because now, and that's the big one. You remember you always have a number of the checks, and you want to make sure there's all the numbers of the checks are accounted for. But that still goes on a lot, especially in small businesses, because they're still paying things with checks, and people are. But now the opportunity to do electronic fraud is huge because now I don't need a check. I can just transfer money between digital money between things. Billing is a big one. Non-cash, that's stealing the copper wire, computers, whatever. Cash on hand, the whole petty cash thing. Registered distributions, expense reimbursements, skimming, where I get money and I don't put it all in the cash register, I take it off the top. Big area that people are doing. People think of really creative ways to do this. It's fascinating. And then corruption. This is the percentage of the frauds that were corruption and the median loss, the average loss, the median loss. So, Canada, 26% of the frauds that were found in Canada were corruption, and this is the bribery thing. And in 1977, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act was passed, but that only in the U.S. deals with bribing government officials. You can bribe other people and you won't get caught. In the case that happened with Siemens in 2006 or 7, Siemens wasn't actually bribing anybody. They were using intermediaries. So I go and say, hey, Shibei, will you go in and we're going to hire you as a consultant to go in and get a contract in Venezuela for $300 million power generation station, and you go away and you negotiate or do whatever you do. We think you're selling, and you come back and say, I got it. Just give me my $6 million that we agreed you pay me for getting the contract, and then we walk away. Well, we're liable for that because we cannot document an invoice that shows that Shibei did this, and this itemized things that added up to a value of $6 million or whatever it is I gave him. I'm just making numbers up here, but that's the idea. So that's using an intermediary. Now, since then, since the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the UK has come up with a very strict bribery policy, and so have some other countries like India and China and some other places. Now, how much they're being enforced? And a sad statistic is countries that have corruption, widespread corruption, are like 23% lower GDP than countries that don't. So it takes away opportunity, because if you have the money to bribe someone, or if you don't, you are not going to be excited about engaging with the economy, because you don't have a chance against the people who have the money. So you should hate corruption, and every time you see it, go after it. But you notice that the percentage that's corruption in some other places, like in South America, in Middle East, North Africa, Asia Pacific, it's a much higher percent of the frauds are corruption because in many cases that's part of the culture or they don't have a way to stop that. I want to show you this real quick. This is a report that comes out each year. I hate to do this because I'm going to end up not being able to get back to my slides. So this is a really interesting report, and it's used a lot in risk analysis and evaluating risks in companies and other things. And load here. But this is a corruption perception index that's really respected, and it shows you which countries have the greatest amount of corruption. Again, corruption perception index. No, I don't care about my color. So this is by Transparency International, and it's redone every year, every other year. Now, one single country anywhere in the world is corruption-free. So, just like there's, this is where the global picture, highly corrupt to very clean. So the Americas are in the middle somewhere, Asia Pacific. EU is cleaner. They've done a better job in some cases. Eastern Sub-Saharan Africa, 2 and 3 countries worldwide score below 50. And so if you're below 50, you have a serious corruption. And 6 billion plus people live in countries with serious corruption problems. So think about there's 7-some billion people in the world, 6 billion of them live in countries. The BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, score less than 50%. 53% of the G20s are below it. And so these are the real clean countries. Denmark has a 90, 100 means you're 100% clean. Denmark and Finland, of course you might expect Somalia and North Korea have some of the worst. What's changed from 2012 report, I think it comes out every 3 years, so this is the most recent report. Greece, Senegal, and UK have improved. Australia, Brazil, Spain, and Turkey have declined. Okay? And there's of 168 countries, how do they measure up? So this is 100 is very clean, 0 to 9 is very corrupt. And you'll see the countries that are yellow here have the highest, so close to 100 is the best countries, the lowest level of corruption. So New Zealand, Denmark, Finland, Sweden. You see the U.S. is down here somewhere. Look at Hong Kong and the U.S. are about the same. But China is almost half of it, 37. And then, so here are sort of your mid-range. Here's the real good ones. Here's sort of your mid-range countries. I don't know if you see your country on here, if you're from another country, but it's a little sad. And this is a map. And see all the red in there? The red and the real dark red are the worst countries. The red, the orange, the yellow are the ones that are pretty clean. So it's a little concerning that you don't see. And this is where it gets bad. So Somalia, North Korea, have the lowest scores. But these are the countries where there's the most amount of corruption. And then it goes to the report. I'm going to put this out on the website. You guys can look at it. Okay. It goes to more in more detail. But corruption is a. Okay, there we go. Yeah, corruption is a really serious issue. So this is a look at the largest fines that have been given for corruption under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and I'm not proud of this because I worked for 15 years with Siemens, but they paid $800 million in fines for those bribery corruptions. And actually it was $1.6 billion because they paid another $800 million to the German authorities for the same thing. So that was a $1.6 billion fine. It was the largest fine up to that point that's ever been given. And these are some of the others: Alcoa, Daimler, Alstom, Halliburton, BA, and You know, these were split between the DOJ and the SEC. And the SEC is very aggressive about this. Hopefully it's not because they're getting a lot of money from it, but you know, they're trying to really crack down on corruption. And again, the only reason Siemens got it, because remember this is a US law, is because we were listed on the exchange. So if you, and the bribery didn't happen in the United States, it happened in other countries, but if you're a listed company, then you're liable for bribery. If you're not a listed company, and you're not in the UK, and you're not doing business with the UK or the US, I'm not sure there is a law. There may be some countries have passed laws recently, but I'm not sure there is a law preventing corruption. So really, really important area. All right, so this is a little hard to see, but this is looking at the median based on the type of schemas. And I'll have the slides out there, but so the biggest schemas are payroll type things. And this one is method of the schema. You know, what did the people do? You know, physical disappearance of inventories or whatever. So, and this gives you actual data on what people were doing. That one didn't come out very clear. I don't know, but it's clear on my screen. But anyway, you know, it just shows you what are some of the things that people were doing and what are the most popular schemas, and certainly the billing and payroll type things. How do you commit a fraud in payroll? What do you think people do in payroll? How can you steal money in payroll? Yeah.
Accrual?
Through an accrual?
Yeah, through an accrual.
Yeah, that's one way.
Vacation.
Yep. Or, you know what a ghost employee is? You set up an employee that isn't really an employee, and they collect the paycheck that goes to a PO box or whatever. Then that's a popular one. Okay. So this is how frauds are reported, and I mentioned the statistic earlier. You know, the external auditors, you know, 3%. Internal auditors, 14% or 16%, I think, in the most recent one, 14 to 16%. But look at 42% or 38% come from tips. That's how people get caught, from tips. Okay. By accident, people find more. By accident, meaning someone just happens to come across something, find more fraud than the external auditors do. That's what we're saying. You know? Notified by law enforcement, confessions, document examinations. But you know, so what it's saying here is all these auditing procedures that we're doing and spending millions and millions of dollars on, we're not finding this stuff. You know, they're not the people finding it. And by accident is not finding it either. You know, I mean, we're not finding the bulk of it. You know, that's the point. And then you know, 51% are reported by employees, but even vendors and even customers report 13%. So customer, what do you think a customer does? And this isn't a fraud, but this happens often. And we saw it when we started running analytics. We saw $700,000 of duplicate invoice payments that were made that were never reported. But what do you think a customer does when you send them 2 checks for, you know, $10,000 instead of 1? How many customers you think say, oh, Davina, you sent us 2 checks, we owe you $10,000, we're going to get it back. A lot of companies don't. They just hold on to it until someone comes and says, they're going to say, oh, gee, we ought to give that back. So, but you know, it's so even customers, vendors, shareholders, competitors, even, you know, 1.6% of frauds are reported by competitors. And I shared that example of what's called greenwashing, right, where your competitor goes out and looks for where you made a statement that you're saving 10,000 barrels of oil and 50,000 trees, and they do the math and figure out that's not right, and then they file a suit against you for misrepresenting your products or something. You know, not really fraud, but okay. So this one is the type of victims in organizations. So no one's exempt here. Private companies have the largest losses, and this would be a lot of small businesses, right? So small businesses don't have the extravagant control environments, you know, so they get hit harder. Public companies are second. Government fraud is next. Not-for-profits is a big thing. You hear a lot about the head of the I don't know, the Red Cross or something that's out embezzling huge amounts of money from this charity, and that's a shame because that hurts people that really need help. And then other level of government frequency, you know, most frauds committed at the federal level. Every time you guys cheat on your expense or your tax returns. Local, state government, and then others. So, so in government, it's the federal government that takes the big stick, which may make sense because they have the largest, you know, budgets. All right. So, who are the victims? What type of organizations are the largest? Banking and financial services. That's why we have Basel III. That's why you have a lot of regulation going on in financial services. That's why financial services is very interested in the blockchain, because the blockchain provides an opportunity to at least mitigate fraud. Okay. The other ones are government, public administrations, manufacturing. Down at the bottom is mining, communications, utilities, and real estate. But I want to point out that this is just based on a sample of several thousand actual frauds. And my contention is that these numbers could be very different if we really found all of the frauds or some larger number of the frauds. And we're not finding them. That's the point I want to know. But this is actual data. So frequency of anti-fraud controls, and this is where proactive data mining analysis, you know, this is what the companies have. They have external auditors, 81%. They have codes of conduct. They have internal audit departments, 73%. 71% have financial services, external auditors. So, you know, we have a lot of this stuff in place, and most of the companies do have something in place. But you know, there's a thing called tone in a company. So I said, like, Enron had won an award for how wonderful their compliance process was right before they got convicted of all this fraud. And a lot of it comes from the tone. You know, what's the message regardless of what I have in place, what structure I have, what's the message I'm really sending? And unfortunately, in many companies, incentive systems incentivize people to commit fraud. So if you can increase your bonus by this amount by holding back this provision or exercising this provision in a different way, what do you think you're going to do? You're going to say, oh, gee, it's going to affect my bonus. So if you create this tone where management isn't sending the right message, and they're, you know, saying profit at any cost, sell, baby, sell, no matter what it takes, we got to meet these numbers. Do you understand that? And if we miss these numbers, we're all going to be out of a job and you'll be fired. So go do the right thing, okay? We know you'll do the right thing. That's the tone. And it's very hard because, and I've been an officer in a company, a senior executive, and I know, you know, we all get these targets, and we got to meet our targets, and the pressure gets really strong to meet the targets, and you start compromising because you're put in a position where, you know, you feel you don't have any choice but to do it. You know? Okay, this is perpetrators of fraud. Okay, I mentioned before, it's accounting people. It's salespeople. It's executive management. You know, it's not the guy out in the warehouse that's committing big frauds. He may be doing something, but it's people like you with graduate degrees that are committing fraud. So don't make that your career choice here. 55% of the perpetrators are senior level executives, accounting, operations, and sales people. Okay. And they have the biggest dollar impacts as well. Okay? The frequency, the tenure of the perpetrator. So it's not people your first year in the company, you're probably not going to commit a fraud because you don't even know your way around, you don't know how the system works. But you've been there 4 or 5 years. In fact, the optimal time is more than 10 years are when people mostly commit frauds. Well, six years and up is when we jump into fraud. Because now I know the controls, I know the system, I know what people are doing, I know what they're looking at, I know what they're not looking at. Gender perpetrators. I think this is really interesting. I said earlier the women are more honest than the men. In the United States, frauds are 44% female, 55% male. In Southeast Asia, 3.2%, those women in here from Southeast Asia are the most honest people in the world, are committing very few frauds. Why do you think that is? Just curious. Why are women not committing as many frauds as men, or why is it disproportionate like that? Do you follow in here? So Asia, North Africa, Latin America, very few women committing frauds. Of the frauds that we're finding, and again, we're not finding even in Europe, but then in the U.S. and Canada, it's almost even in the U.S. And 2 years ago, it was more men. Sophia.
They don't usually work Southeast Asia, usually
Okay. Yeah. Sure. So they don't have to, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to say they just don't have they just don't have the opportunity, but they're not in a
Yeah.
position to.
Do you think women are more honest than men?
I think they have more of a conscience.
This will get this class divided quickly. Yeah, now.
Culturally, they are very honest.
Wait.
Culture and religious belief.
Oh, religious beliefs and culture.
Yeah,
Culture, absolutely.
culturally,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah, that's probably a big part of it. How many CEOs do you have in Southern Asia and senior level accountants that can commit fraud? Yeah, that was interesting to me, that statistic, because a lot of the frauds that I got involved in investigating after the fact were females. That had that. I don't know, maybe that's just they were in positions, and that was in a U.S. or European company. Okay, so that's interesting. But I think you're right. I think it's that they don't have the opportunities to be in positions where they're going to be able to do that. Like you said, Sophie. Okay, and then the age that people are. Okay, so the people that commit fraud, the age of perpetrator and frequency of median loss. So you see it's not a lot of the younger people. It's as they get older and get more established and know what's going on, they're able to do bigger frauds, or they're at levels in the company where they can do it. So here's the thing I mentioned earlier. If you have a postgraduate degree, you are much more likely to commit a fraud than someone with a high school graduate or less, or with an undergraduate degree. You'll be better. Your MBAs helps you commit fraud, I guess is the way to work. Now, 47%, okay, this is the one where, okay, how many people are involved in the frauds? So, one person, two people, three people, four people, five or more. So, as soon as you get past one person and you have two people, now it's collusive fraud. Now people are committing fraud and there's no one to stop them, really. There's no control environment to stop them unless we're using analytics. Because, then if it's collusive, I can work around most controls in most organizations. And I think that's one of the most important things about why what we're doing is inadequate. And an earlier report said that most financial fraud, this is all frauds, remember strategic, operational, compliance, and financial. But most financial fraud is collusive. And that we see in many of the cases that do get exposed. All right, and this is the one where, do the criminal background checks if you like, but 88% of all frauds are first-time offenders with clean records and no background. So if you take in any level of confidence, and that's what most companies will tell you when you say, do you check for fraud in your hiring process? They say, yep, we do background checks. But again, most of the people convicted of fraud have no background. And most of them are first-time offenders, so you're not going to find them. Only 5% or 8% did jail time or even had a conviction at all, or even were under investigation. Okay? And so, what are the behavioral red flags? I mentioned, going and finding someone who is driving a Lamborghini and is accounts payable clerk, but the biggest one is living beyond your means. So suddenly, someone that didn't inherit a huge amount of money is building a new house, buying new cars, taking you all out, your MBA class all out for drinks every night, and buying your dinners and everything for you. Financial difficulties, dealer attitudes, oh man, I'm on top of the world. A lot of times addictions, divorces, family issues, legal problems, excessive family pressure for success, or excessive management pressure for success. Cases referred to law enforcement, again, a very small amount of them are referred to law enforcement, and usually they're settled out of court because no one wants the publicity. So I want to take a minute before we take a break here, and I want to play a video for you. I'd like you to listen carefully to this because it shows some of this rationale that someone went through, and this is an actual video of a guy from Siemens, actually, that saw a fraud coming and how he reacted to it. And I want you to put yourself in this guy's shoes and see if you would have acted differently. Let me see if I can get this to play now.
The management within Norway at that time decided to increase their profit without informing the Norwegian defense, and increase it far more than what the contract allowed. And that was the start of this.
This happened.
And I destroyed it very early.
This happened at Siemens, and this is the guy that actually was the whistleblower. I just want you to listen carefully to what he went through emotionally and through this. I just want to show you how personal and devastating fraud can be. Now since then, Siemens has cleaned house, but this guy.
At that time, decided to increase their profit without informing the Norwegian defense, and increase it far more than what the contract allowed. And that was the start of this, and I destroyed it very early. I saw the figures right away, actually.
And you knew that they were, the term we use is cooking the books.
Yes. And the thoughts I had at the time was, this is strange. Is this how we are doing business in the private sector? Because I was just myself a new employee at Siemens. That started to bother me because there was beginning to be a lot of millions in our system that I knew belonged to our customer. And I felt that I had to bring the matter up with my superior. So I asked him very carefully, what plans do you have with these millions?
The surplus.
The surplus, yes.
Yeah,
that's
it's a slush fund.
balance.
It's a slush fund that they
In our accounting system. And I always said that this was a topic that was none of my concerns. It went additional 2 or 3 months after that, and we received these ethical guidelines from Siemens headquarters in Germany. But I read that you have to bring forward matters which concerns unlawful things, like what we were doing, based on these ethical guidelines, and that I had to sign my name under it. I felt really much more obliged to do something about the matter.
You were convinced at this point that this was illegal.
Yeah, I knew it. I knew that this was illegal.
This wasn't just an accounting error.
No. It was a conscious act from, not only the top management, but several people within Siemens. 24th of September, the management received a written report from me. This report said that the contract was Siemens violated it, but instead, about 10 days later, I could see that this morning was booked in Siemens. And then the swindle was a fact. There was no way back. In December 2003, I decided to report the matter to Siemens headquarters in Germany, also Siemens Business Services. And I chose to report this anonymously. It was after I reported to Germany, the story really begins. And noticed that some of the directors didn't want to talk to me. And there were some strange episodes during this time that made me feel that something was wrong. And eventually, after about 40 days, I received an email where I was summoned to a meeting with the rest of the management the same day. And the agenda for the meeting wasn't revealed. I remember I went out of the office to go to this meeting, and I was stopped by the division director who said I had to wait until he was ready. We was standing in the elevator. I remember I asked him if he knew what this meeting was about, because I already was anxious and thought it might be because of this report I had forwarded to Germany. He just nodded, he didn't tell anything. We came up, stood in front of the meeting door, and I asked him to go in before me, because I said I had to go get a cup of coffee or something, but I really needed to build up courage to walk into this meeting. And I did enter to there as the last person. The room was filled with people, but there was a total silence. No one spoke a word. I watched the top management who was sitting on the far end of this table, meeting table, and they were looking at me with hatred in their eyes. And then I, of course, knew what this meeting was about. And I tried to find a place as far away from these guys as possible, but there were none. There was only 2 available seats on the CEO's right hand. So I had to walk around the table and in the silence and really waiting for my execution. And it came while I sat down. The CEO raised up and threw my report, my confidential report, on the table and screamed out, "We have a mole in our system, high up. We will expose him and fire him. We know that this report has been sent from the head post office in Oslo, but we will not stop at that. We will find this man and throw him out." And while I said this or screamed it out, he was looking at me, because they knew that this had to come from me, because I had, along with this report, forwarded a lot of figures from the accounting systems that only had to come from my division. So, well, that was really the start of my whistleblowing career. I went, well, I was interrogated. Sorry, I have to stop a little bit, because it's
You were trapped.
Yes, I was trapped. It's very difficult to explain this in English also because it's an emotional thing for me. So I have problems in speaking about this in Norwegian. But anyway.
Because your world was coming apart.
Yeah, I knew that I was finished. I remember I went home and flew up in the toilet, and I was waiting for my wife to come home, and yeah. And I really wanted to stay at home, never ever show up at Siemens again. But I understood that if I wanted to have some small chance to survive this, I needed to build up documentation for what was going on, because I really didn't have that. I smuggled out papers, very few at the time, sneaking in inside my jacket, and was going through the cellar. And there are tunnels in this Siemens system in Norway that connects all the buildings. And I parked my car outside the Siemens area, just over by the cameras. And they didn't have cameras in the tunnels either. So I felt really like a spy. It didn't take long before I received a lot of, well, I had to leave the company. I was fired. And then I had to decide whether I should continue and take this matter into court system, and knowing that this would become a major scandal in Norway if for example, the media should find out. I really didn't want to take that fight, because I knew that like me, I would be very small compared to Siemens. So
it's the largest engineering company in Europe.
Yes. So I was really scared. But on the other hand, if I didn't do something about that, it probably would be even worse for me. Well, I received threats on my life, and people wanted to shoot me and beat me up.
Because you were...
Because what I exposed within Siemens and China. So there are a lot of people there that's who's not happy about what I exposed. And I think that they are thinking that this is how you do business.
Let me go ahead and close that there. I just wanted you to get a sense of, wasn't that kind of a, that's a guy who, what I was encouraging you earlier, he did the right thing, and in exchange he got, he was physically sick and throwing up and struggling with his life and losing his job and everything. And that's I wanted you to feel a little of that emotion. I have another one which I don't have time to play, but of another guy. It's in German, but it has a translator. But it's same story. He was another guy who did the same thing. And this isn't some rare case. This happens all the time. And this is what you're up against when you expose fraud. So my contention to you is, let's use technology to expose fraud, and prevent it. Because once you prevent it, because this is the kind of thing that goes on, not just at Siemens, but at any company, when people, when the pressure's really on to achieve results or to, make numbers or whatever. So I wanted to give you a flavor of what fraud is about. Was this helpful? Does this give you an idea of what fraud is and what it's about? And I want to reinforce the idea that we're not finding most of the fraud. Okay, fraud is going unfound. Any questions or comments about fraud or the impact of analytics on it, or blockchain on it, or anything about fraud that interests you? Did you want to? As I find that to be a topic that most people that go into auditing are very fascinated by fraud, and would like there's some way be forensic and get involved in either the prevention, the detection, or the investigation of fraud. Any comments or questions, anybody? None of you would ever commit a fraud, right?